I'd like to welcome our next speaker, who's come to us all the way from Liverpool, from the National Museums of Liverpool and University of Liverpool, Ashley Cooke, and he is going to take us further back in time again and speak about the experimental work of FCJ Spurrell, Faience, Glass and Beads.
Hi, thanks, Cassia. Today I'm going to be talking about a small part of the Egyptian collection within National Museums of Liverpool. Essentially what we have is a collection from a man called Flaxman Spurrell. And within this collection is remains of Spurrell's experiments with Egyptian pigments, which he conducted in the 1890s. I'm going to be particularly focusing on that part of the collection, and also try and put this man, Flaxman Spurrell, into a context, along with his experiments as well. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about the Spurrell collection today was so that I could learn more about the collection myself, but also about the man who assembled it and acted as its first curator. I discovered the collection when I was rehousing the Egyptian collection within new storage facilities. The majority of the collection has been stored in very unsuitable wooden boxes since the 1960s. Two of these boxes had the intriguing title Spurrell Technology Kit. The collection was purchased in 1956 and consists of over 1,000 artefacts, all largely derived from the excavations of Flinders Petrie in the 1890s. When I arrived at the museum in 2006, some of the collection was on display in the gallery that had been put together in 1976. You can see it here with this yellow paint background. And before this, some of the pieces were also in the gallery assembled in the late 1950s following World War II. I selected a lot more from the Spurrell collection for display in our newly refurbished galleries, which opened in December 2008, which you can see here in the slide in two cases, one about art and one about technology. The Spurrell collection came to Liverpool in 1956, but the Egyptian collection is over a century older. The nucleus of the collection, of over about 16,000 objects, was formed by Joseph Mayer, who was a silversmith and goldsmith, whose great financial success enabled him to indulge a passion for archaeology and collecting. And this was in Liverpool when it was one of the richest ports in the world. He opened his own Egyptian museum, as it was called, in 1852 to showcase his extensive private collection. Many of the pieces in the collection of great historical importance, such as the tomb robbery papyri and the Ramesses III girdle. The collection is largely on provenance to specific archaeological sites. None of it's really from controlled excavations. His purchases consist of collections from those made by diplomats and travellers in the early 1800s, including Henry Salt and Viscount Valentia. You can see Belzoni's name scratched onto one of our two Sekhmets in the collection, which gives a little clue to its provenance. Mayer also bought from collectors who travelled to Egypt with specific purpose of purchasing antiquities for sale back in Europe, including Joseph Sams. And many of the objects in our collection are illustrated in this catalogue published in 1839. Following Joseph Mayer's donation in 1867, the Liverpool Museum gradually enhanced the collection by subscribing to 15 excavations of the Egypt Exploration Fund, later Society, and to 10 excavations of the British School of Archaeology in Egypt, the Egyptian Research Account founded by Flinders Petrie. In 1888, Amelia Edwards, the founder of the Egypt Exploration Society, was in Liverpool to oversee the dispatchment of finds coming from Bubastis into the port of Liverpool to make their second journey to Boston. Whilst she was there, she wrote an article about the collection describing it as second only to the British Museum. John Garstang, Professor of Methods and Theory of Archaeology at the University, founded the Institute of Archaeology at the beginning of the 20th century. He ran his excavations in a similar manner to the Egypt Exploration Fund, and the museum was a major recipient of his work. So we've got very strong holdings of generally all of Garstang's sites that he excavated, as you can see here. This is a photograph of him with his assistant, Harold Jones, who did quite a lot of the work, really, and some assistants at Beni Hassan here. He's very well funded for photography. He was taking about 1,000 photographs per expedition. So we've got a really rich archive in the university. And then also his fieldwork reports that he sent out to his sponsors held within the museum. So the collection's enhanced by this great archive. You can see here stele on display, and then its actual position within the ancient monument at Abydos, quite a rarity. The museum's always had a strong connection with the university. The early Brunner professors of Egyptology effectively curated the collection, and this display was put together in the 1920s in the main hall of the museum. The Egyptian collection's always pretty much been at the centre of the museum. At the outbreak of World War II, a sensible decision was made to evacuate most of the collection to essentially North Wales, to 3 different country houses, and also some of the most important pieces, essentially gold and the Maya papyri and the girdle, were placed in the vaults of the St. Martin's Bank, this huge bank in Liverpool. If you notice the sign not there, it does also mention that a considerable part of the gold reserve of the Bank of England was kept there at the same time, presumably for kind of safe dispatchment to Canada with a convoy in case of invasion by German forces. The evacuation measures proved to be a wise precaution. In May 1941, an incendiary device destroyed the museum and burnt it to a shell. You can see that a lot of the artefacts of a considerable size, i.e. the coffins and statues, were left in the museum, and you can see a man here bringing out a terracotta sarcophagus lid the following day. The museum was without a home for over 30 years. This photograph you can see here on the, I always get muddled left and right, on the right side, you can just see some remains of some Hittite reliefs along the top that were still left in situ. And that's what remains of the Egyptian and Hittite galleries. And that was taken in the 60s. The collection was moved to a large house in Liverpool, Carnatic Hall, which you can see here. And Elaine Tankard was the curator of the collection before the war and the years that followed. And he essentially was a great campaigner that sent out appeals for donations to the museum to replace the war loss. I think we lost somewhere over 5,000 Egyptian objects in the war. And also purchases, were given grants to replace the collections. And over 10,000 acquisitions were made for Egyptology in the years that followed the war. The purchase of Norwich Castle's Egyptian collection in 1956 provided a good replacement for provenance material from a range of sites excavated by Petrie, Garstang, the Egypt Exploration Society. Particular strengths were finds from Amarna, those both by Petrie and by Frankfurt and Pendlebury in the interwar years. And also, actually, 2 objects that came out of Amarna much earlier, including these 2 gold rings here, which were in the possession of famous Victorian novelist Sir Rider Haggard, whose collection was bequeathed to Norwich Castle Museum. Is now held by ourselves at National Museums Liverpool. And actually these objects are particularly interesting because they have what I'd refer to as kind of interesting object biographies. One of the rings was actually broken by Haggard. He used to enjoy wearing ancient jewellery, and actually there's references to him wearing the jewellery, and in particular that very ring, and breaking it, getting out of a taxi, going to his London club one evening. Within the Norwich Castle Museum is the collection of Flaxman's Spurrell, some of which was donated by him in 1904 and the remainder presented to the museum by his sister after his death in 1915. The material in the Spurrell collection is largely from Petrie's digs in the years between his resignation from the Egypt Exploration Fund and when he founded the Egyptian Research Account and British School of Archaeology in Egypt. It was in these years that he was working independently with funding from two Lancashire textile merchants, Jesse Howarth and Martin Kennard. Up until I started looking at the collection, I was quite unaware of who Flaxman's Spurrell was, and it seems I was not alone. Flinders Petrie opened Spurrell's obituary by writing, "The notice of the death of Flaxman C.J. Spurrell will not convey much to the present generation of workers in Egyptology." This was published in 1915, and almost a century on, Spurrell still remains a largely unknown figure in Egyptology, even though Petrie goes on to credit Spurrell by saying that with his help and influence, Spurrell had a large part to do with the wide and scientific treatment of the subject, coming from a man who many would credit as being the father of scientific archaeology. It doesn't get much better than this. Born in Kent in 1842, Flaxman Spurrell was educated at Epsom College, a boarding school designed for the sons of doctors. However, Spurrell never went on to practice medicine like his father, preferring a life studying antiquity and geology. Petrie and Spurrell first met in 1877 and soon became close friends. Indeed, in 1897, Petrie described Spurrell as almost the only man with whom I've ever been familiar, when asking Spurrell to effectively act as his best man at his marriage to Hilda. Reading the many letters exchanged between Petrie and Spurrell, held in the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology in London, you get the impression these men are intellectual equals who enjoyed discussing unlimited topics ranging from Anglo-Saxon toponyms through to the ancient Egyptians' perception of colour. This is really quite unlike the correspondence of his Liverpool contemporary, John Garstang, who I am more familiar with. Garstang enjoys writing about tennis courts and golf courses he set up at Abydos, how many birds he shot at Merowe, or Liverpool versus Everton football matches. Spurrell helped Petrie edit his publications and even helped him draft his resignation letter addressed to the committee of the Egypt Exploration Fund. His own work appears in many articles concerning lithics and antiquity in general, but also in several of Petrie's fieldwork reports, through specialist reports or through his illustrations. On a more personal level, there are several letters in the archive that shed light on the close friendship of Spurrell and Petrie. On the 17th of December 1889, Flinders Petrie is at Lahun writing a letter to Spurrell, which concludes with a 44-line rant about his idle assistant, Mr. Hughes, who was taking day-to-day care of the excavations at Gurob. Many of you will know Mr. Hughes is the man responsible for the extremely poor documentation of this site. Petrie ends his letter by saying, "Oh, enough of this grumble of mine, I must go to sleep now." So, Flaxman Spurrell was that friend you can always count on to call at the end of a bad day at work, on a dig, or in the museum. If you read Spurrell's entry in the second edition of Who's Who in Egyptology, you may, like myself, have thought that Spurrell spent several seasons in Egypt as assistant to Petrie, but this is not the case. Petrie always tried to persuade Spurrell to join him, but he never did. Rather, Spurrell was the assistant who stayed at home and oversaw the handling of tons of material sent from Egypt by Petrie that had to be received and dispatched in England. He helped with the organisation of the exhibitions of Petrie's findings at the end of each fieldwork season, such as the Amarna exhibition in London, which you can see in some of our archive pictures here. Also, if you look closely, you can see an interesting kind of piece of Victorian museology with this mounting of a limestone block using string, and also notice the decorative floral print wallpaper in the background. But today I'm going to concentrate on presenting the different samples of colour we have in the collection, as this is the area Spurrell was experimenting with in the mid-1890s. But before I do this, I'll quickly introduce some of the other elements to the collection, such as the 119 ceramic moulds we have from Amarna. And also a sprinkling of the 15 cards mounted with artefacts that often correspond to the fieldwork publications, such as you can see here, a detail of imperfect glass beads from Amarna. Some of the cards complement objects in our collection, prove to be very useful with teaching, such as this good parallel here between this exceptional name bead we have in our collection and some examples from Gurob as well, which you can see here of the same colouring and style, though without the quite interesting inscription. It's not just finished pieces as well. Spurrell was very much interested in the process of manufacture. You can see here different types of glass. The cards are organised by colour, material and type, and it's very much like the illustrations you see within the contemporary fieldwork reports put out by Petrie and partly illustrated by Spurrell. There's actually an interesting story attached to these two cards. They were made by Spurrell, and I think it reveals a little bit about the man as well. The excavations of Quibble and Green between 1897 and 1899, on behalf of Petrie's newly founded Egyptian research account, discovered the refuse of stone bead making industry at Hierakonpolis. Spurrell annotates the cards, explaining how the microliths were used as drill bits to bore holes into beads made from stones such as carnelian. In the archive, there's a letter which shows that Petrie had sent this material to Spurrell for sorting through. However, Spurrell was outraged at what he first found when he opened the crates to discover they were just full of dirt and flakes of flint and bits of broken beads. Spurrell believed Green, the archaeologist, was playing a game with him, as he put it. Petrie had to calm Spurrell down through a series of letters explaining that what Green had done was found many interesting small pieces, and he quickly abandoned trying to sort out these little flakes in the dirt, and had the whole patch of ground packed up and crated, knowing that Spurrell was the perfect man to go through it. But almost teasingly, Petrie does add at the end of his final letter that Spurrell can throw out the earth when he's finished with it, it's of no value. While we're on that topic as well, I'm sure it's something that Carolyn will be touching on as well, is that I think a reburied cache from Quibble and Green's work has recently been found as well by the Hierakonpolis team that's working at there now, and they've actually done some experimental archaeology as well by trying to use these microliths to bore holes into tools. And there's also a huge collection of cards as well in the Petrie Museum, and that's another thing I need to think about, whether it's actually Petrie, Spurrell, that made those ones. But what I'll be focusing on today is colour. So the first mention of colour we see in the letters between Spurrell and Petrie is on the 3rd of September 1881, when Spurrell asks if there is an Egyptian word for blue. During Petrie's excavations in the early 1890s, his letters home often mention any colour samples he's obtained for Spurrell to experiment with. By 1895, Spurrell had a full range of colours from securely dated provenances. These 50 colours are typically held between two watch glasses, as you can see in this image. These glasses span from the Old Kingdom to the Roman period, thus allowing Spurrell to observe chronological changes. He published his study in the Archaeological Journal in 1895, and today I'll be focusing on three specific parts of his experimenting. At the Middle Kingdom pyramid town of Lahun, Petrie uncovered only the outline plan of the valley temple that once served the pyramid of Senwosret II. The masonry had been robbed by Ramesses II for his temple building at nearby Nas el-Medina, ancient Hierakonpolis. Some fragments of the painted relief decoration were recovered, and Spurrell was impressed by the vibrancy of the colours and the great refinement of the work. He wrote about how different colours were applied and his experiments to test the strength of the binding material by trying to remove the colour with water of different temperatures and even using soap to try and remove the colour from these pieces. These tests proved that the colours were not just simply held on by pressure and that the binding material was still present. Spurrell was also clearly amazed with the detail of Middle Kingdom art, noticing fine details and hieroglyphs, such as how the metal blade is fastened to the handle of this adze, He also observed the fine red outlines of hieroglyphs, such as you can see on the ends of the reed holder here, which he described as being truly macroscopic in width and scarcely perceptible to the observer. From Amarna, Petrie also supplies Spurrell with fragments of painted wall decoration. Typically, the pieces have a variety of colours on them. One fragment is particularly interesting as it forms part of a column that, from an area Petrie designated as the Harem Court within the palace. It has an unusual spiral pattern design with raised spirals painted yellow against a background of red and blue, but it's now only faintly observable. You can see a more complete piece from the exhibition archive. Spurrell found a piece of stone from Lahun where the red colour had been smudged over the outline of the carving and covered over with a thick smear of the binding medium mixed with white gypsum. This provided him with a good quantity of material to experiment with to determine what the binding medium was by a series of solubility tests using water and hydrochloric acid, and by thermal tests. His test suggested that albumen, egg white, was used as a medium, and Spurrell experimented with duck and goose eggs, finding that if the egg white is whipped and then allowed to dry, the stringy network of proteins is broken up, making the solution a more useful adhesive. In his paper, he concludes that albumen, plant gums such as gum arabic and gelatine were used as a binding media and varnish from at least the time of Snefru through to the Roman period. Recent research has not totally invalidated this claim, although evidence suggests albumen is used as a varnish and possibly in previous restoration work. Petrie's samples from the 4th dynasty funeral chapels of Nefermat and his wife Itet at Meidum gave Spurrell a further binding material puzzle. In some parts of the tomb chapel, craftsmen created images using a new invention of applying coloured paste into the cells, cut into the wall, rather than the normal tempera painting technique. Spurrell was curious about what held these pastes in position. He made experiments with paste by combining plant gums and resins with pigment samples from the tomb, enlisting the help of botanists from Kew Gardens to provide him with a range of various gums and resins for trial. He also noticed on the red inlays that the hardness is greater at the surface, suggesting material had been applied as a varnish. He extracted this through boiling and recovered a sticky gel that was an altered gelatine. He replicated the material by boiling some 4th dynasty bones from Meidum and deduced that the gelatine was applied to the dry surface of the inlays once they were positioned in the cells. Some Meidum inlays mounted within a display box, actually made by Spurrell, and now in the British Museum, have recently been analysed and has confirmed the remarkable accuracy of his work. In his 1895 paper on Egyptian colours, Spurrell seems quite satisfied with the identification of basic pigments in the Egyptian palette. What he was keen to experiment with was trying to capture the techniques used to create the great range of hues in New Kingdom Theban tombs, but also the Amarna princesses, if you remember that these were discovered by Petrie just a year earlier and was something Spurrell would have had first-hand knowledge of. Petrie recovered large amounts of red and yellow ochre from Amarna, both of which are naturally occurring iron oxides used as pigment. Spurrell examined the lumps and noted many had very different constitutions, suggesting they'd been carefully sourced from a variety of localities not in the immediate neighbourhood. Within the collection, we have sheets of card with small swatches of colour on them made by Spurrell. His notes say they're from various buildings and that each colour constitutes a separate find. The pigments were lightly pulverised and mixed with gum arabic, just sufficient to hold them, he notes. Some of the raw materials still have their identification labels attached, and I've been able to match them to the paint swatches. The colours on the left show the result of the raw pigment mixed with the binder. On the right side, you'll see that Spurrell roasted the pigment and then mixed them with the binder, which produces red and brown colours. With the red ochre, Spurrell did not observe any noticeable changes on roasting. Spurrell, what he believed at this point was that the vast majority of red ochre lumps were in fact yellow ochre, which had been roasted to produce in mass red pigment. This idea is now rejected. Amarna also provided a large quantity of processed pigments from pots or broken sherds in which they were kept or mixed. Again, Spurrell took samples and mixed them with as little gum arabic as it was needed and made these coloured swatches. Like the raw ochre, he roasted the samples before mixing with gum arabic, and you can see the results on the right-hand side. Spurrell said that he had found the earliest known use of shading, noting the use of orpiment, bright yellow arsenic sulfide, to illuminate the flesh of royalty and give greater intensity to details such as earrings. Spurrell correctly observed it was a very rare pigment that was probably imported and only used for the elite. Recent pigment investigations confirm Spurrell's observations. The Max Planck Egyptian Pigment Project, conducted between 1980 and 1991, found small amounts of orpiment used in tombs of the Theban elite, and fieldwork at Amarna unearthed samples of orpiment in the 1922 excavation dumps next to the workmen's village, perhaps derived from the decoration of tomb chapels of members of the royal court. The final part is about blues and greens. As mentioned before, Spurrell had access to many fragments of pots that once contained paint from Lahun, Amarna and Gurob. Blue was a colour of great symbolic importance in ancient Egypt and was found in the largest quantity as a frit, which we call Egyptian blue. Petrie did not find any Egyptian blue inlay at Meidum. At Lahun, Spurrell identified a small range of Egyptian blue, but of unequal quality, and the mineral malachite also being used for green. At Gurob, Petrie just found a small range of blues and greens, much smaller than the quantity he recovered, Petrie recovered from Amarna. The blues from Amarna range from pale lilac right through to a deep bluish violet and some green frit. The making of coloured frits in glass is closely aligned, as you'll probably find out from Paul Nicholson's talk as well. And Petrie understood the rarity and value of glass, and so collected a wide range of samples across all stages of the manufacture. Spurrell proposed a two-stage manufacture, beginning with an initial heating of the ingredients in the furnace, and then a second heating of the selected best parts of the frit, essentially what was broken up from what one might call the slag, and reheated within shallow pans to create circular cakes of Egyptian blue of uniform consistency. You can see a fragment of one at the top there. Spurrell wasn't the first man in modern times to replicate Egyptian blue, but he was one of the few to have access to securely provenance-coloured frits of all grades of success and failure. He was perhaps the first to try replicating Egyptian blue of different hues, and we have 9 different types in the collection. Essentially, Spurrell's legacy gives us a large range of ancient Egyptian colours, small artefact types and vitreous materials that I hope will continue to inform us about frit, faience and glass technology in New Kingdom Egypt, as well as other aspects of Egyptology, and I thank you for your time for listening.
Thank you very much, Ashley. You left just enough time for one question. Anybody?
Everyone, coffee.
You're off the hook then, Ashley. I'd like to thank you again.